Hello everybody, Scot-sword here, and welcome back to another video. And this is the latest installment in my tips and tricks strategy guide videos for Fury of Dracula. And in this one, we're going to be talking about the hunter starting positions, the configuration of the positions of the four hunter characters at the beginning of the game. Now, I wish I could say that I came up with this idea for this video all on my own, but that's not true. I was actually talking to one of our a recent new member to our digital edition community, Snuffleupagus, and we're doing some post-game analysis of some of his matches. He's competing in the currently ongoing New Blood Championship, and after doing, I can't remember if it was on camera or off camera, he recommended maybe I could do a video on this topic, because when you're listening to experienced players doing commentary, we use special names for the different starting configurations, and obviously for a newer player that might be a little bit complicated, and why are we calling them by different names and what's the differences between them. So yeah, I thought we could easily do a video all about that. So Snuff, if you're watching this, thank you very much for the suggestion, much appreciated. If there's anything, if you could be a member of the Discord community that we have, or maybe not, but if you have suggestions for videos you'd like me to do, then feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will get round to them. So let's get started. This video shouldn't take too long. Won't be as in depth as some of the other ones, but it's still a very interesting topic nonetheless. So general considerations, when you get the game out the box and you read the rules and everything, there's kind of two main things that should sort of stand out to you immediately. That it is ideal that the hunters start in big cities. In order to, when you do the supply action, of course, you always get an event. But if you're on a big city, they're the ones which are squares on the map rather than diamonds. I'll show them when I show the map in a second. You get items in big cities, as well as events, rather than you get only events in small cities. So if you're doing the supply action, then especially early on in the game, it's better that you do it in big cities, so you get those items. Because remember, the items are the things that you need to defeat the encounters and then ultimately get into combat with Dracula and kill him. Especially, it's even more so in our sort of the meta that the digital edition community has developed. In the sense that you should just, for the first week more or less, the hunters should sit still, not move at all, and there's a couple of exceptions to that rule, and just keep supplying during the day. So they want to get through the item and event decks as much as possible. So your supplies are stronger if you're doing them in big cities rather than small cities. And then obviously you want to spread out to cover as much of the board as possible. You don't want to have all your hunters stuck on the western side of the board and leave the entire eastern portion open for Dracula to run around in. So that, I think that's intuitive. I think when you look at the game initially, even if you've not seen any videos about Fury of Dracula or anybody else playing, it kind of makes sense to you to spread out as much as possible. I know when you buy the physical board game, if you play with the basic rules, they recommend starting locations for the hunter characters. Actually, I should have included that in this video. I didn't even think about doing that, but never mind. But in general, I think once you move on to the advanced rules, you very quickly move away from the recommended start. I mean, the recommended start isn't bad, again, because they all start in big cities and the like, but you move away quite quickly from that. You have to think about, depending on where you start, how does that influence your movement? Ideally, you want to kind of start on rail lines, because rail lines do get you around quicker than just moving by road. Obviously, if you employ fast horses, and that's something that in our community we normally do in our games, we use fast horses and we try to maximize their usage, then obviously that will influence your choice. You don't have to be necessarily on the best rail connections, because you can use fast horses to work around that problem. I've done a whole video about fast horses, so if you don't understand why we use fast horses and why they're really, really strong, you can go into the playlist on my channel where you'll find this video, and there'll be lots of other guides, and one of them will be about hunter movement and fast horses. And then, once you start getting used to a certain setup for your hunters, you need to assess the weaknesses. Some weaknesses might be obvious immediately. You might suddenly realize, okay, we're leaving this part of the board a little bit more open for Dracula, so maybe then we should target it with hired scouts. when we get the chance to, if we get that event card. But just also over time, you might just suddenly realize, all right, certain players will exploit this weakness. If there's a hunter isolated, they might get targeted, all that sort of thing. It just depends. But again, it's also very personal too. So just either if you're playing on your own 1v1 against a Dracula player, or if you're playing as part of a group, you need to just, over time, you assess the strengths and weaknesses, the drawbacks and the benefits to your sort of the starting positions of the hunters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some different starting configurations, and then we can just sort of talk about them a little bit. So the first one, I thought would be kind of a nice one to do. Oh yeah, with the map, I've presented the sort of the board game version of the map, the top-down view, rather than the digital edition, because the digital edition is a bit awkward. The southern cities are closer to you than the northern cities, because it's not presented in a top-down way. And also then with the hunter models, they're almost like a little bit transparent, and you can see the cities behind them. So I did it like this, and hopefully the icons I'm going to use to represent the different hunters are big enough that you can see them. Maybe if you're on your phone, it might be very small, but on a computer screen, it should be okay. So the first one I wanted to show you is the starting configuration that was used in the tabletop video. So that was the tabletop, if you don't know, was a YouTube series hosted by Will Wheaton, where people would come on and play, various board games with him. And they played Fury of Dracula. And the reason why I wanted to include this one is because a lot of people were probably introduced to Fury of Dracula from that video. I definitely was. That's where I discovered Fury of Dracula, because of that video. So we've got all 4 hunters. Unfortunately, you can't see my cursor, which is a little bit annoying, but never mind, we'll have to work around it. But you can see how you've got all 4 hunters on big cities, and they're pretty well spread out. So that's, ticking those 2 boxes. And that's nice. Obviously, in the tabletop version, they don't sit in supply. They started moving around a bit early, but it doesn't matter. As a setup, it's not that bad. And honestly, I think maybe the why Seward in Lisbon, why is Godalming in Santa? Okay, you could quibble about that and maybe move people around or whatever. Having Mina in the middle between 2 hunters is kind of nice, because then she can potentially psychic scan a couple of regions later on. But I think in general, it's not a bad setup. And I think even, Will Wheaton, even when Quincy Morris did his analysis of it, he did say that, yeah, it's quite a nice setup, because they're very much spread out across the map. They're splitting the map into north and south. There's no sort of real east-west, disparity. The big weakness of this setup that you can see is that Britannica in the top right corner, top right corner, no, top left corner, goodness me, no, I don't get left and right mixed up, good grief, I don't know what's happening with me. The northwest corner, there we go. Britannica is completely empty. So naturally, Draculas might be extremely tempted to go there. So if you start getting hired scouts, then you should probably start prioritizing checking Britannica. I think in the video, Will Wheaton, who's playing Dracula, doesn't actually start in England or Britannica, which would have been quite a good choice. Instead, he started in Prague, very close to Van Helsing. So maybe for YouTube to make it a bit more interesting, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I would say a lot of Dracula players would start in Britannica, and it's quite awkward then, because the hunters are going to take ages to get over there unless they have excellent weather. They'll need at least 2 moves to get onto Britannica, let alone get onto the sea that's going to mature first. So if you're willing to give up, a couple of matures, then this might not be a bad setup to go for. It just depends. It definitely deters a lot of the continental European starts. So that's that one. When I joined the community for the digital edition just under 2 years ago now, or maybe it is about 2 years ago now, more or less, we're getting to that anniversary, this was the setup that I was presented with. I'm going to call it the Quincy Morris start, because I don't know if Quincy Morris came up with it. I wouldn't be surprised if he did, given the amount of thinking that he put into the game. I think he was the one who definitely either came up with or publicized the whole fast horses theory. So a lot of the way that we play the game stems from a lot of his thinking on it. And even though the meta has evolved a little bit and people come along with their different and they'll tweak it a little bit, a lot of the current thinking comes from Quincy. So I'm going to call it the Quincy Morris start, whatever you like. Okay. So what have we got? So the whole weakness of the tabletop start with having a hunter, no hunter in the UK or the Britannica is alleviated because we've got Van Helsing there. Van Helsing's position, if you look at Quincy's really old videos, Van Helsing's starting position kept moving around, sometimes in London, sometimes in Liverpool. Liverpool was especially to stop Ireland, but Ireland is not really a thing, at least in the amongst the really experienced players in the community. That being said, in the New Blood Championship, I've seen a few Ireland starts because people might not expect it and they might not know how to deal with it. So it's a legitimate strategy to go to Ireland. So yeah, I've seen it in Liverpool. You've seen it in Van Helsing, sometimes in Manchester to restrict if Dracula does start in Britannica. And sometimes Dracula will start there to try and, beat Van Helsing up. If you go into Manchester, that restricts the movement a little bit. I prefer London or Edinburgh personally, just because you're on a port city and you can get into the North Sea or English Channel in one turn, and then you'll be able to get onto the mainland the next turn. Or you use Exeter and Weather, you can come across in one turn. So I preferred that. But again, that's just small preferences. Over time, it might change. Seward is on his own in Iberia, in Madrid. This starting location is particularly nice because if Evil Presence, which is one of the event cards, if that is obtained, or if Seward draws local rumors, it reveals pretty much the entirety of Iberia except Barcelona. Local rumors would flip any encounter, or not any encounter cards, but it would reveal any cities which are adjacent to Madrid, where Dracula had gone through, and Evil Presence would just tell him that he's adjacent to Seward, apart from Barcelona. Barcelona is the exception. So that extremity location is excluded, and Seward has very good coverage of that region. It's not like Bucharest on the other side, as an example, where, yeah, sure, Bucharest covers Klausenburg and Galatz and Constanta, but then Dracula could still go to Athens and work up that way towards Sarajevo and Zagreb. So, yeah, Seward really nicely, just by sitting there, he blocks off that extremity. He's on a rail line that gets him up into Paris. It's a very efficient rail line. So, all in all, a nice starting position for Seward. And then we have Godalming and Mina in Vienna and Munich, respectively. I don't know that the video that I just clicked on this morning had it this way round. Maybe Quincy might have done it sometimes where the positions were flipped. I don't think it makes too much of a difference, to be honest. Now, the cool thing about this is that obviously they're on the eastern portion of the map, so they can get across to Constanta and Galatz if they need to. It's quite close to Italy, so you can get down to Bari, that sort of thing. It can cover Germany. The cool thing is with this, because you got the two hunters separated, if they do get an Evil Presence or local rumors, it eliminates a little bit more of the map. And also, you often see it when Quincy Morris is playing. After a couple of days of supplying, one of those two hunters will move into the other one, to the city that the other one is sitting in. So they can then psychic scan and then also trade items. And the cool thing is, because you've got them separated, you don't know which region they're going to psychic scan. Is Mina going to move to Godalming and they'll psychic scan Austria-Hungary? Or is Godalming going to move to Mina and they'll scan Germany? Or, also conceivably, they could both go down into Venice. Mina could use the road to go down to Venice, and Godalming could go down to Venice by rail, and they search Italy. So it gives them a little bit of flexibility. They could potentially scan some things and be a little bit unpredictable. And then Dracula doesn't really know which way they're going to go. So that's potentially 3 regions that Dracula is going to be a bit scared about starting in, because he could get caught with a psychic scan. But maybe if you study an opponent and you realize that maybe the first couple of days they're not going to scan, you might be able to start off in Germany and then sneak into Gallia, into France, before the psychic scan happens. But then, as Quincy said in one of his videos, there could just be a time where the hunters scan day 1. Literally, Godalming's first move could be to go to Mina. And they'll catch Dracula out in Germania, or if Mina moves to Godalming, to Austria-Hungary. It just depends. So it gives you quite a lot of flexibility. You're on a nice rail connection into the east. If you've got fast horses, most of the eastern part of the map can be covered. Same with the center. So yeah, in all, I think this is a very decent start. If you moved them much further east, then the center of the map is left way too open. So I think this is the right sort of compromise. And even though it looks like they're in the middle of the map, which they kind of are, if you count the number of cities to the east of them and the number of cities to the west of them, there are a lot more to the west. So all in all, yeah, they're covering a huge portion of the map by where they're positioned. So when I joined the community, that was the starting configuration that I saw and I practiced with. Very, very soon after, though, I adapted this slightly. And I basically just kept Gadami and Mina together from the very beginning. I explained it before in other videos. I don't mind explaining why I've done that. In my opinion, especially early on, the hunters are about efficiency, not about being tricky and being deceptive. The only time where hunters can maybe be deceptive could be in combat, where you're hiding combat items from Dracula, or maybe events where you might be able to surprise Dracula by playing an event that he doesn't expect you to play. But in terms of getting going at the beginning, it's all, I mean, the whole hunter play in general is about efficiency, not being tricky. I think efficiency is more important. So by having Gadami and Mina in Vienna from the very, very beginning, they don't waste an action moving across to each other. So they can trade instantly. They can psychic scan Austria-Hungary instantly if they want to. Obviously, Dracula would never start in Austria-Hungary because why would he when there's such a risk of the psychic scan catching him? Or would he, right? It's kind of like then it's all about double bluffing then. Because it's so obvious I'm going to psychic scan, maybe I won't psychic scan, and then Dracula can get away with it. Who knows? I always did it in Vienna just because it's slightly closer to the east, so you can use the yellow rail line to charter carriage into the east if you have to rush to try and stop an encounter. That's just my opinion, but that's the way I did it. I just moved them across into the same city, and I kept then normally Van Helsing in London, and that's been quite fixed now for quite a long time, and that's how I've done it. And I found it quite strange actually, because I was recording videos at this point, but then suddenly during the first tournament that we did, that was in the autumn of 2022, I just started seeing all the other players, or not all of them obviously, but a lot of the other players using my starting configuration rather than Quincy's. I was like, whoa, wait a minute here. There's I haven't really tested, you know, the merits of this setup compared to Quincy. And to be honest, there's not much difference between them. It's a very, very small modification. So obviously Quincy gets most of the credit for it. But it's just funny how, you know, just suddenly the meta shifted towards my setup rather than Quincy's, even though there hadn't really been much of a discussion in the community about the merits of either one. The joys of being a YouTuber, people just copy it basically, but it's fine. It's fine. It's just funny. So then it wasn't me who said the Scot-sword start, so I think somebody else did, and it's just kind of stuck. So that's why I'm calling it that. So that's me. I have changed around and done some other things recently, but in general, this has been my go-to when I was competing in the tournaments in 2022 and then the spring of 2023. I was using this setup pretty much every single game without fail, and I think a lot of the other players did as well. Yeah, I just like the efficiency of it. There are weaknesses, obviously. By moving Mina or Gadami out of Munich, it means then Italy is not so well covered, Amsterdam is not so well covered, but the East is better covered. It's always going to be the same with these starting configurations. If you move hunters slightly into different positions, you'll cover one part of the map better, but another part of the map will be less covered. It's always going to be that way. So you're just going to have to try and work out for yourself what you want to compromise on. And because of this setup, you know, when I get a hired scout, where am I going to be checking? I'm going to be checking Amsterdam. I'm going to be checking the south of Italy, which can then catch new players out when they play against this setup, and then suddenly they get found, you know, day one in Naples or Rome or Bari or something. It's like, how did you know that? It's like, well, because it's a weakness to this setup, right? So, anyway. So that's mine. That's my Scot-sword setup. There are some variations of Quincy's setup that I'm going to show you. So this one is actually one, hopefully Wormtalon won't mind. This is public knowledge because Wormtalon's been recording his game, so I hope he won't mind. So Wormtalon's another member of the community who's participating in the New Blood Championship, but also competed in the World Championship last year. And Wormtalon does a similar thing to me, but instead of it being, you know, Gadaming and Mina in Vienna, they're both in Munich. I actually really like this setup. I think it's kind of neat. It makes it basically the weaknesses of my setup in terms of Amsterdam and the south of Italy, that's now kind of there's still weaknesses, but not as bad, because by moving them into Munich, you're actually one road closer to Bari. Even though it doesn't look it because of the rail line, you're actually one road closer, as you don't need chartered carriage necessarily to get to Bari in time. You're closer to Amsterdam. You're now on a white rail line to get closer to Amsterdam. So in general, I actually kind of like this starting setup. I think it's kind of neat. And I think it's going to be one of those things. There's a little bit weakness now in terms of the east, but still, if you get fast horses, you can get to pretty much almost every location in the east. So I think a lot depends. I really like this setup. I don't know how Worm Talons felt about it. It'd be interesting after the tournament, depending on how successful Worm Talons be, and that we can maybe talk about it. But I think it might be one of these things where, we got the Quincy start, my start, and Worm Talon start. I think those three are they're very similar to each other. There's just very small tweaks, but maybe based upon the opponent you have, depending on which Dracula you're against, you might vary the setup. I think that's kind of nice. I think there's definitely a little bit of flexibility there. What other ones we've got? All right, okay. So these are a couple of variations. This one's I call it the Fangs of Firestark. I think Fangs is the only player who's done this setup. But you've got Godalming and Mina separated, just like Quincy Morris has. But you've now got Mina in Genoa rather than in Munich. And again, this is kind of nice because it doesn't eliminate the risk of Dracula starting in Italy, but it makes it less likely that Dracula's going to start in Italy. It's still, with Godalming in Vienna, it still makes the east a little bit, still, you can cover the eastern part of the map very well. Maybe northern Germany not so much, but again, as I said, you're going to have to, you take with one hand and you'll give away with another kind of thing, right? You're going to cover one part of the board, but then you'll leave a little bit more of the map open. It's kind of nice that Mina's on this direct rail line from Genoa up to Vienna, so they can easily meet up. Obviously, if the tickets don't behave, then you're going to have maybe a little bit of a problem potentially. That's why I just like having two hunters in the same location, because then if tickets don't play ball, then you don't have to worry about moving them to each other with a throwing away potentially a white 1 ticket to get the yellow 2 you need to get them to meet up. But that's just me. But again, it could be sort of personal or bias or experiences. If a certain player, I don't know if this is the case with Fangs of Fire, but if you're a player who every time he plays hunters, the Dracula player will start in Italy, then you'll maybe modify your setup so then Italy is not a thing you have to deal with, right? If dealing with Italy is a weakness of yours, then having a hunter slightly closer to Italy, I think, makes a lot of sense. Arguably the same if Dracula always starts in the eastern part of the map, and that's your weakness, then maybe start a hunter in the eastern part of the map. I think that's absolutely fine. These are all adaptable. It's not set in stone. You have to use the Quincy Morris style. You have to use my setup or whatever. Everyone can have that little bit of variation, just depending on what it is you want. So you've got the Fangs of Fire start, and then there's also Pirate Joe, who's an older member of the community. Similar is like the Quincy Morris start, but instead of having Vienna and Munich, you've now got Munich and Milan. So again, Italy is very well covered because Mina's on the rail line from Milan up to Paris. Her and Seward can easily meet up in Paris if they get the right train tickets and trade and do psychic scans and all that stuff. It makes the center of the map. It really, Dracula does not want to start in the center of the map against this setup. The east, more so. It's making the east more inviting. But then, if you get hired scouts, then you're probably going to get caught if you go into the east, because Pirate Joe is going to be checking the eastern locations. So again, it all depends on how you want to play the game. Especially as the Dracula player, right? What plan do you have? Are you just going to go to extremity and just try to get, a couple of quick vampire matures and win the game, or are you going to try and go for sort of a longer, prolonged thing where you go into the center, you weave around the hunters, you beat them up with lots of encounters, and then run away? It all depends on what it is you want to do. Right, okay, so then this one, this is a modification of then my setup, which is then a modification of Quincy's setup. It's all we're all learning from each other. So we're going to call it the Pizza Wizard start. Now, I think actually even Pizza Wizard might admit that Mr. Green, who's an older member of the community, came up with this first. But I think because Pizza Wizard won the World Championship recently and he popularized this setup, we call it the Pizza Wizard setup now. So sorry to Mr. Green. I remember Mr. Green used to use this setup, but not all the time, but quite a bit. But it's become like it's called. We now call it the Pizza Wizard start, and it's exactly the same as mine, except we've got Seward in Bordeaux rather than in Madrid. So why on earth would you do this? Because you're leaving now Spain as an extremity location open. It makes the center of the map more covered. Places like Amsterdam and Hamburg, or maybe places like Frankfurt, that sort of thing, are not as inviting for Dracula to go to because you've got Seward on a rail line that's easier to get up there in 2 moves. Whereas Madrid is quite hard to get from Madrid up to Amsterdam in 2 moves. You need to have a chartered carriage or something to make that work. So yeah, it makes the center of the map less inviting. The weakness of Italy still exists, but still, having Seward, who is a strong fighting hunter, closer to the action, and you can maybe get him into the action maybe 1 or 2 turns earlier, could be well worthwhile. It does leave Spain open. I did this start a little bit. I remember when Mr. Green started playing it, I did try this setup a little bit. But I just found that Dracula went into Spain every single bloody time. So in my mind, I was like, nah, I just can't be bothered dealing with Dracula going into Spain. I'll just move Seward back to Madrid. But then, funny, Pizza Wizard then said during the tournament that I think maybe only one Dracula player he played against went into Spain. So it all depends on your own personal experiences. If you find that somebody abuses Spain, then you'll probably move a hunter back into Spain. If not, you'll keep them in Bordeaux and you'll be happy about it. So it just depends. I think if there's going to be any hunter who's going to be walking into an extremity location on their own, Seward makes the most sense because he can carry more items. Hopefully he gets good ones in his first few supplies, but he is the best equipped having an additional item and additional event, and also he can heal quicker. He is just very good at dealing with Dracula's trail. He's a very good trail clearer. The other thing too is because if Dracula does start in Spain, yeah, he's got quite a lot of locations and he can go around in loop-de-loops, and he can go around the coast and then go into Madrid and then go up to the other coast, or he go all the way around the coast. He can do lots of different things. But as an extremity location, it's quite small. So eventually he's going to get forced to sea, and maybe that's what the hunters want. If they get good event cards like Money Trail or Hypnosis, they don't really care if Dracula goes to sea. They'll be able to supply up, and then they'll be able to hit him with one of those event cards once he leaves. The East is a bit different. East is still an extremity, but there's more space for Dracula to run around, and he can go into places like Athens, which is very hard to reach because it's off a rail line, but it's actually the Athens only connection is to Valona, which is also not on a rail line, if that makes sense. Whereas in Spain, the only city that's not on a rail line is Cadiz, but it's connected to Lisbon and Madrid. Also, Granada doesn't have a rail line either, but they're both connected to Madrid, which is on a rail line. So it does make it a little bit easier to get around. Whereas Athens is a very awkward place to go to. So yeah, it just depends. Again, just depends on what type of sort of Dracula player you're up against. And also then the way that Dracula moves. Dracula can move around in such a way that when Seward moves in to intercept the first encounter, he might get ambushed with something in say for example the first location is in Granada or Cadiz. Seward moves to Madrid to then move to Granada or Cadiz the next day, but then there's bats in Madrid and he gets battered away somewhere else, and then bad things start happening to him. It just depends also on the Dracula that you're playing against. Do they have the encounter cards to punish a lone hunter? That's the problem in the digital edition. Dracula cannot see his encounter cards before he plays the starting location. In the physical board game, Dracula can see the encounter cards before it plays the starting location. So, even if you have an idea, yeah, I'm going to go around into Spain and beat up Seward, well, maybe you don't have the cards to do it. So, it just depends. But anyway, so that's Pizza Wizard start, and as again, it's definitely becoming popular in sort of the last, 3-4 months because of Pizza Wizard's success in the World Championship. Well done, Pizza Wizard, again for winning that. Very well played. So this is another one that's come along recently, and it got a little bit of playtime during the World Championship. We call it the Superhero Start. So it's pretty much the same as my setup, but the difference is Seward and Mina have swapped positions. So the reason why it's called the superhero start is you're basically making Seward over there a superhero. The reason why often we have Godalming paired with another hunter like Mina, or in this case Seward, is because Godalming supplies twice as fast. He gets double, not events, but in terms of items, he gets double the number of items and also double the number of train tickets. So because of that, he is able, especially in terms of the items, he is able to supply up and hopefully get really good items and then literally just give them to Seward. And then Seward can run off and be a superhero and deal with the whole trail and kill Dracula, all that good stuff. And if Godalming's got weak items, doesn't matter. He can just stay there in Vienna a couple more turns and just keep supplying until he gets good ones, and then off he goes as well. So that's what you're doing here. You're basically using Godalming's ability of gaining, items twice as quickly to facilitate Seward's ability that he can carry 4 items even better. So you're guaranteeing that Seward has 4 good items. There are some times where Seward, when he's isolated, he ends up with kind of a crappy hand of items, and it takes him a while to get those cycled out of his deck, especially since he's stuck in an extremity location as a hunter. If he's in Madrid, you're constantly thinking, oh, do I move him or do I keep supplying? And sometimes you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation with that. If you're in Bordeaux, you're a little bit closer to the action, so you can maybe take a turn or 2 more to supply. But in this situation, you're guaranteeing that Seward gets good items. What's the weakness of this situation? Mina's now on her own. So you've got the 2 weakest hunters in Van Helsing and Mina on their own. Van Helsing isn't so bad because firstly his ability is trading. So having him in an isolated location is fine. And there have been some games where literally Van Helsing stays in London the entire game and doesn't move because he's trading and doing other things. And Dracula often doesn't want to go. Dracula will want to go and beat up Van Helsing, but because then he has to go to sea and all this stuff, it's a bit awkward. He's going to take a lot more damage for it, and sometimes Van Helsing will have combat events to deal with Dracula because that's what happens when hunters get things like planned ambush or escape route. Van Helsing will keep them, and then Van Helsing will trade them to hunters later in the game who need it on the spot. So often Van Helsing is holding on to these type of events. So Dracula doesn't want to deal with him, but Mina on her own, yeah, she's a bit vulnerable. I would never start with Mina in Bordeaux, because if Dracula does start in Spain and Mina moves in, it just takes a couple of really bad situations with encounter cards and a fight with Dracula, and Mina could die. And then that's influence points lost, things will start maturing because nobody else is nearby. So I think having Mina in the extremity location where Dracula could get found by local rumors or evil presence or whatever, and then she moves towards the other hunters later in the game, I think is the way to do it. I tried this setup a bit. I like it. But obviously then if you end up in a situation where Mina has bad items, it feels really awkward. It just depends. Again, you have to play with this setup for a few games just for you to get used to it and just see what you think. It makes the East very scary for Dracula when you've got pretty much the 2 stronger hunters on that side of the board. Yeah, that's scary stuff. But obviously, Psychic Scan, you don't have to worry about that. If a Hypnosis appears, I'm personally a player who doesn't use Hypnosis early. But I know there's some players who do, and that's fine. We can have our own opinions about when to use the cards. But obviously, Hypnosis is not a threat because Mina's far away from everybody. Psychic Scan is not a threat. So Dracula can start basically anywhere he wants. But starting close to Godalming and Seward could end up being a really bad decision. It just depends. And then the last one I've got, I think, if I remember rightly, is the anti-East start. So this is something that I may be thinking of because there are a lot of games that I've played against, even though I haven't played many games recently, but I could tell with my setup, especially when I was playing as Dracula against my own setup, I'd often start East because it is one of the weaknesses of it, that even if you do have 2 hunters on that side, one of them's Mina, she could get beaten up, and they need fast horses to really be effective because the rail lines are terrible in the East. So this is something maybe to counter that, where you have somebody in Bucharest. Now, I really wouldn't want them as far east as that, but because there are so many small cities in the East, Bucharest is the viable option. So I'm thinking maybe Seward there because it's an extremity. You have then Godalming in the middle of the map. In this iteration, I put him in Milan, maybe in Munich. I'm not quite sure which one. Milan would be better because you're on the rail line up to Paris, and then Mina can join him potentially. Munich is maybe a little bit better to try and get into northern Germany. It just depends. I'm not saying this is I haven't actually tried it with Godalming in Milan. I think I've already tried it in Munich, but I think Milan might be the way to go. And then you got Mina in Spain, as we talked about before, and Van Helsing still in the UK. So it makes the East very weak for Dracula, because you got Seward there. Godalming's not far away. He can provide quite a lot of support, but obviously it still runs into the same issues where Godalming's going to be supplying, and if you get a bit unlucky with the way the item deck has been shuffled, Godalming could just be drawing all the good items, and he has nobody to give them to. And you could end up ditching a lot of good stuff. So you just got to be a little bit careful with this one. I've tried it a couple of times. I need to play it a lot more to see if it's viable, but there are things you can do. I think that's the thing. There's a lot of flexibility. It might be, I might only bring this out against very specific Dracula opponents who I would be really scared if they went to the East. It just depends. I don't know if I actually included it in the video. Hang on. No, I haven't. There was also another one I saw. It was actually JB Philly did a recording recently against Dano, who's another player in our community. And Dano did a very interesting... I wish I had it on the screen. I forgot to make it before I recorded. Dano did a very interesting setup where Britannica was left empty. You had Seward and Van Helsing in Vienna, and you had Godalming and Mina in Paris. Now, I thought it was actually a pretty cool setup, because then the problem that you have in terms of one hunter having good items and the other hunter having bad items is kind of alleviated because they're both in pairs. So you can easily trade tickets and items between them. So the items should be more easily distributed, because there are some games, and you see it all the time, where one hunter gets 2 horses, and that's normally Van Helsing, and it's really annoying when that happens. Or you have all the knives on one character, all the heavily hose on another character. You're like, oh, I need to move these around. So having 2 pairs of hunters, I think, is kind of a neat thing, very interesting. But obviously Britannica was left empty. So obviously then there's a weakness to that, where Dracula could exploit that. But then you'll check it with hide scouts, and then if you're willing to let maybe 1 or 2 things mature, then it might be worth it for the efficiency later. It just depends. You need to play it several times against different people, and you'll see, you know, the strengths or weaknesses of these different setups. There's no exact right way. As much as I love it when people use the Scot-sword start, there are weaknesses to the setup. That is the point. So if you alter it to, you know, alleviate those weaknesses, but then you might create other ones, that's fine. Everyone's free to kind of experiment however they like. It's actually been really cool with the New Blood Championship when some of the newer players came in and they didn't really know our meta very well. They were having lots of different setups, and with people in different positions. I saw once Godalming was in Cadiz, and another one where I think a hunter was in Berlin or something. I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then a couple games later, they're like, Scot-sword start. Clearly people will be watching videos, right? So anybody who's watching this who's a newer player or doesn't know anything about our meta, feel free to experiment with starting locations. As long as you're more or less spread out across the board and you're starting in big cities, there's no kind of right or wrong way about it. So it would just be interesting to see what people come up with. And you never know, in a year's time or in 2 years' time, there might be a different start, which is the meta thing to do. And then it changes back again. Anyway, that's it. I've talked way longer than I wanted. I wanted this to be like a 15-minute video, so I apologize, but I love rambling about this game. So yeah, hopefully that has answered some of your questions. I guess the real thing will be if Snuffleupagus is content with everything I've explained. If not, I've failed to do my job. But feel free to leave any comments below. If you have any questions or comments, you know, leave them below. I'll try and answer as much as I can. If you have any ideas of anything else you want me to talk about, leave it below. I am quite busy these days, but if I see a comment about a particular topic, I will get round to it, I promise. I've done videos so far about the Hunter event cards, Dracula event cards, Hunter items, Dracula encounters. What else have I done? I've done 3 games on each faction, analyzing the different moves. I've done one about fast horses. I think that's it. There might be others in the playlist. You can check out the playlist on my channel. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. But thank you for watching, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Have fun fighting some vampires, or have fun maturing vampires if you prefer to play Dracula. And I'll see you in the next episode of this series very, very soon. Just to let you know as well, there's a playlist I'll leave in the description to all the games from the New Blood Championship. So if you don't know what that is, it's a tournament where lots of newer players are playing. So you can go and check it out. We've got commentary all about the game, and obviously all the commentary is from a broader perspective. I would also just quickly say, because I forgot to say it, there was a commentary that was done very recently. I think it was JB Philly and Met King, if I remember rightly, did a very good job in the commentary of explaining. I think it was my setup, the Scot-sword start, but I wanted to have a video like this where the information was, about all the starts was accessible in one place. So there you go. Right, folks, take it easy. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye-bye.